Here we are, the final 15. What will we uncover? What will we learn? If you're just joining us, we covered the first 30 presidents and talked about some things that made them interesting in 2 previous videos. If you'd like to watch those first, and I don't blame you, I hate watching episodes out of order. How the hell can you even follow the plot? Then the links for those are in the description. We last left off with the country grasping for escape from the clutches of the Great Depression. With Herbert Hoover out, we now turn our attention to the 32nd President of the United States.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the only U.S. president elected to 4 terms, guided the nation through the twin crises of the Great Depression and World War II. But he also had another claim to fame, one that had nothing to do with economics or warfare. He was related by blood or marriage to 11 other U.S. presidents. Among his notable presidential relatives, Theodore Roosevelt, his 5th cousin and a major political inspiration. FDR even married Theodore's niece, Eleanor Roosevelt, making Teddy his uncle by marriage. George Washington, John Adams, James Madison, and Martin Van Buren, all distant cousins. Others, like Ulysses S. Grant, William Henry Harrison, and Zachary Taylor, were connected through extended kinship networks, typical of old colonial families. FDR came from 2 of the most prominent families in American history, the Delanos and the Roosevelts, whose New York lineage dated back to Dutch settlers in the 1600s. This aristocratic pedigree helped shape his confidence, polish, and sense of responsibility, but it never stopped him from championing common Americans during the country's worst economic collapse. Despite being born into wealth, Roosevelt used the presidency to deliver massive structural reforms, including the New Deal, Social Security, banking regulation, and public works programs. His fireside chats, delivered over radio, brought his voice into homes across the country, making him a familial figure for millions. Perhaps more than any other president, Roosevelt transformed the office into a daily force in American lives. And though his policies sparked fierce debate, his distant family ties served as a reminder that, in a strange way, the presidency had always been part of his DNA. At first glance, Harry S. Truman looks like a man with a typical middle name. But the truth? The S in his name doesn't stand for anything. And that tiny detail has led to more confusion than almost anything else in his biography. Here's why. Truman's parents, trying to honor both of his grandfathers, Anderson Ship Truman and Solomon Young, couldn't decide which name to use, so they simply gave him the initial S to represent both. No period was needed, technically, but Truman often used one anyway, making him one of the few people in history whose middle initial was both significant and meaningless. Well, shit. Linguistic oddity aside, Truman's presidency was anything but ordinary. Thrust into office in April 1945 after the sudden death of Franklin D. Roosevelt, Truman had been vice president for only 82 days and had been kept in the dark about major issues like the Manhattan Project. Just weeks later, he would authorize the use of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, bringing World War II to a close and ushering in the nuclear age. In the years that followed, Truman made bold and often controversial decisions, launching the Marshall Plan, recognizing Israel, desegregating the U.S. military, and firing General Douglas MacArthur during the Korean War. He left office with low approval ratings, but his reputation grew steadily in later decades. A former farmer, failed businessman, and plain-spoken Missouri senator, Truman brought a decisive, no-nonsense approach to leadership, reflected in the famous sign on his desk, "The buck stops here." So, while his middle initial might not mean anything, Harry S. Truman made sure his presidency meant a great deal, reshaping the post-war world and proving that ordinary Americans can make extraordinary decisions. Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander during World War II and the architect of the D-Day invasion, led one of the most complex military operations in human history. But when he got to the White House in 1953, he brought with him a surprisingly down-to-earth passion: golf and Texas-style barbecue. Eisenhower was a golf fanatic. He played over 800 rounds during his 2 terms in office and installed a putting green just outside the Oval Office. If he had a spare moment, he could step outside and practice his short game, sometimes with visiting dignitaries, often just to unwind. But golf wasn't his only backyard improvement. He also had a large brick barbecue pit built on the south lawn, where he'd host outdoor cookouts and grill steaks for friends, family, and foreign leaders. These gatherings gave his presidency a touch of middle American charm and reflected his desire for informality in an office burdened with Cold War tension. Eisenhower's presidency, 1953 to 1961, was defined by a mix of calm leadership and cautious modernization. He oversaw a booming post-war economy, warned of the growing military-industrial complex, and enforced school desegregation by sending federal troops to Little Rock, Arkansas, a pivotal moment in civil rights history. Despite being one of the most respected military leaders of the 20th century, Eisenhower's style was anything but authoritarian. He governed through consensus, avoided ideological extremes, and often downplayed his own role, famously saying, "Leadership is the art of getting someone else to do something you want done because he wants to do it." And in his spare time, Ike just wanted to work on his swing, grill some steaks, and bring a bit of weekend America to the world's most powerful address. John F. Kennedy, America's youngest elected president and a symbol of 1960s hope and glamour, came from immense wealth. His father, Joseph P. Kennedy, was a multimillionaire, and JFK had access to one of the most powerful political dynasties in U.S. history. So when he took office in 1961, Kennedy quietly did something few presidents had done before or since. He donated his entire presidential salary to charity. At the time, the presidential salary was $100,000 per year, roughly $1 million today. Kennedy, already a sitting senator and Pulitzer Prize-winning author, chose to give every dollar of his pay to various charitable causes, including public hospitals and relief organizations. He wasn't the first to do it. Herbert Hoover had done the same during his presidency, but Kennedy's gesture stood out as a symbol of humility and public service, especially during a time when America was balancing post-war prosperity with Cold War anxieties. But JFK's generosity extended beyond money. Throughout his life, he hid severe medical conditions from the public: chronic back problems, digestive disorders, and Addison's disease, a life-threatening condition that required daily steroids and medication. Despite the pain, he projected effortless energy and charisma, giving speeches that electrified crowds and inspired a generation. In just over 2 years, Kennedy navigated some of the most intense moments of the Cold War, including the Cuban Missile Crisis, the creation of the Peace Corps,
the push for civil rights, and the promise of landing a man on the moon. His presidency ended tragically with his assassination in Dallas on November 22, 1963. But his brief time in office left an enduring legacy of service, inspiration, and quiet generosity.
Lyndon B. Johnson was known for his towering presence, outsized personality, and no-holds-barred political tactics. But his sense of humor could also be downright alarming. One of his favorite pranks, pretending the brakes had failed while driving guests around his Texas ranch. Johnson owned an amphibious car, a rare German-made Amphicar that could drive on land and float on water. When hosting visitors at his LBJ ranch, he would take them for a spin, and then, with a mischievous grin, steer straight toward a lake, shouting things like, "The brakes don't work, we're going in!" As the terrified guests screamed, Johnson would laugh uproariously when the car hit the water and kept floating. It was the perfect LBJ prank. Part showmanship, part power play, and completely unforgettable. That same theatrical flair defined his presidency, 1963 to 1969. After assuming office following the assassination of John F. Kennedy, Johnson used his legislative mastery to pass a wave of transformative laws. His vision of a great society led to the creation of Medicare, Medicaid, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and sweeping anti-poverty programs. But Johnson's presidency was also overshadowed by the Vietnam War, which escalated dramatically under his watch. The war divided the nation and ultimately drove Johnson to decline to run for re-election in 1968, despite his massive domestic achievements. Behind the scenes, Johnson was a relentless force, persuasive, intimidating, and intensely personal. His Johnson treatment, leaning over someone, speaking close, never letting up, was legendary in Washington. And so was his appetite for control, whether in Congress, the press, or an unsuspecting passenger. In everything he did, Lyndon Johnson believed in big gestures, sometimes legislative, sometimes absurd, but always unforgettable. Before Watergate, before the resignation, before the infamous "I am not a crook" press conference, Richard Nixon showed America a different side of himself, one that involved a piano, a live audience, and a national TV appearance. In 1963, while still a private citizen after losing the California governor's race, Nixon appeared on the Jack Paar program, a popular late-night talk show. Toward the end of the segment, Nixon surprised viewers by sitting at a grand piano and performing a self-composed piece. Let's have a listen. The song had no title, but its somber, almost romantic tone surprised the audience and reminded the public that Nixon wasn't just a political figure, he was also a trained musician. In fact, Nixon could play piano, violin, saxophone, clarinet, and accordion, all by ear. He had no formal music education, but learned instruments as a child and used music as a form of escape and expression throughout his life. Once in the White House, Nixon occasionally entertained guests with piano performances. During a 1974 state visit, he even played a private duet with legendary pianist Liberace. Of course, Nixon's legacy would ultimately be shaped not by music but by politics and scandal. His achievements were significant, opening diplomatic relations with China, signing major environmental legislation,
founding the EPA and overseeing the end of U.S. involvement in Vietnam. But the Watergate scandal, a bungled break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters followed by a cover-up, would consume his second term. Facing certain impeachment, Nixon became the first and only U.S. president to resign, leaving office in August 1974. Yet, for a brief moment before the fall, there was Nixon the performer, sitting at a piano, playing a haunting melody of his own creation, revealing a side of himself the public rarely saw and would quickly forget. Before he became the only person to serve as both vice president and president without being elected to either office, Gerald Ford was a college football star, a Navy officer, a lawyer, and, for a short time, a male model. In 1942, while a young lawyer in Grand Rapids, Michigan, Ford posed for a series of photographs for Look and Cosmopolitan magazines. Although he modeled in various magazines as a Yale law student, posing in swimwear, suits, and casual attire, those images were typically used as artist references rather than published photos. There is no known official photograph or fashion spread of Ford shirtless or in glamorous fashion, and the only confirmed image tied to his modeling work is an illustrated Cosmopolitan cover showing him dressed in Navy uniform. But there's nothing saying we can't imagine that glorious image. Now that's a pile of hunky masculinity if I've ever seen it. Sorry. Anyway, tall, athletic, and clean-cut, Ford was perfectly cast for wartime American masculinity. But rather than pursue modeling or acting, both options presented to him, he chose a life of public service, enlisting in the Navy shortly after Pearl Harbor and serving in the Pacific during World War II. Decades later, after serving as House Minority Leader for nearly 9 years, Ford found himself thrust into the national spotlight when Richard Nixon's Vice President Spiro Agnew resigned in 1973. Nixon appointed Ford under the 25th Amendment, and less than a year later, Nixon resigned, and Ford became the 38th President of the United States. Ford inherited a nation scarred by Watergate, economic turmoil, and a crisis of trust. In his first major act, he made the deeply controversial decision to pardon Nixon, arguing that the country needed to move forward. The move likely cost him re-election, but history has since debated whether it was an act of political sacrifice or political miscalculation. Ford's presidency, 1974-1977, was marked by steady, unglamorous competence, a stark contrast to the chaos that preceded him. Yet behind that modest image was a man who once graced magazine covers and turned down Hollywood, proving that even the most down-to-earth presidents can have surprisingly glamorous footnotes. Long before he entered the White House, Jimmy Carter had an encounter that left him, quite literally, looking up. In 1969, while standing outside with a group of friends in Leary, Georgia, Carter spotted an object in the sky that he later described as very bright and changing colors, red, white, and blue, and moving without sound. He watched it for several minutes before it disappeared. I forgot to add Carter's account to our UFO documentary. No one's perfect. Anyway, in 1973, while serving as governor of Georgia and preparing for a presidential run, Carter did something most politicians would avoid. He filed an official report with the International UFO Bureau. He was clear that he didn't believe it was an alien spacecraft, but he couldn't explain what he'd seen and felt a duty to be transparent. The event captured the public's imagination. During his 1976 campaign, Carter even promised that if elected, he would make government UFO records public, a pledge that generated attention among believers and skeptics alike. Once in office, however, his administration walked back the promise, citing national security concerns. Still, Carter remains the only U.S. president to have formally reported a UFO sighting, making him a unique figure in the long history of presidential brushes with the unexplained. Of course, Carter's legacy stretches far beyond that mysterious night sky. As president, 1977-1981, he brokered the historic Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt, established the Department of Energy and the Department of Education, and emphasized human rights in foreign policy. His administration also faced serious challenges, including skyrocketing inflation, an energy crisis, and the prolonged Iran hostage crisis. After leaving office, Carter built one of the most admired post-presidencies in American history, championing humanitarian work, global health, and housing through Habitat for Humanity. But it all started with a quiet Georgia night, a glowing object in the sky, and a future president willing to admit, "I don't know what that was."
Before he became the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Reagan was already a household name, not as a politician, but as a Hollywood actor. Over 2 decades, he appeared in more than 50 films, including Newt Rockney, All-American, and King's Row, often playing wholesome, all-American characters. But Reagan wasn't just acting on screen, he was active behind the scenes as well. In fact, he was elected 6 times as president of the Screen Actors Guild, SAG, the major labor union for film and television performers. His leadership during the 1940s and early 1950s helped steer the Guild through a tumultuous period marked by anti-communist investigations and labor disputes. For his service, Reagan was eventually awarded a lifetime membership in SAG, a unique distinction for any U.S. president. His time in Hollywood sharpened his communication skills, helping him become what would later be known as the Great Communicator. When Reagan transitioned into politics, first as governor of California and later as president, 1981 to 1989, he brought with him an unparalleled mastery of image, message, and media. He redefined modern political communication, turning televised addresses into powerful tools of persuasion. As president, Reagan oversaw sweeping tax cuts, a massive military buildup, the escalation and eventual easing of the Cold War, and a rhetorical campaign that helped bring down the Berlin Wall. His policies remain polarizing, but his ability to connect with the American public was undeniable, even in high-stakes moments, like when he joked after a microphone check, "We begin bombing in 5 minutes." Reagan's entertainer instincts were always on display. He was, quite literally, the only U.S. president with a SAG card, reminding us that in American politics, sometimes the line between stage and statecraft is thinner than we think. George H.W. Bush, the 41st President of the United States, was known for his diplomatic skill, foreign policy leadership, and deep sense of public service. But he was also known for something a bit more daring in his later years: jumping out of airplanes voluntarily. Bush made headlines in 1999 when, at the age of 75, he celebrated his birthday by skydiving, strapped to an Army parachutist. Most people would have considered that a once-in-a-lifetime thrill. Not Bush. He did it again for his 80th, 85th, and 90th birthdays. When asked why he kept doing it, Bush said, "Just because you're an old guy, you don't have to sit around drooling in the corner. Get out and do something. Get out and enjoy life." The jumps became symbolic of his adventurous spirit and commitment to defying expectations, even in his 80s and 90s. But Bush's passion for parachuting wasn't new.
As a young Navy pilot during World War II, he was shot down over the Pacific and had to bail out of his plane, his first and far more harrowing parachute experience. He was rescued by a U.S. submarine, but the memories stayed with him, perhaps explaining why he took up skydiving later in life, to conquer the fall on his own terms. As president, 1989 to 1993, Bush oversaw the end of the Cold War, managed the fall of the Berlin Wall, led a broad international coalition during the Gulf War, and signed landmark domestic legislation like the Americans with Disabilities Act. Though he lost re-election in 1992, he earned widespread respect as a statesman and humanitarian, often putting country over party. And when he wasn't guiding the world through historic transitions, he was jumping out of planes, a reminder that courage comes in many forms. And sometimes, leadership means taking the leap yourself. When Bill Clinton appeared on the Arsenio Hall show in June 1992, he wasn't just a presidential candidate, he was also a saxophonist with soul. Dressed in sunglasses and playing Heartbreak Hotel on his tenor sax, Clinton delivered a performance that became one of the most iconic campaign moments in modern political history. Let's have a listen. Oh man, it's like he's making love to my ears with his mouth. The appearance was a strategic masterstroke. At a time when Clinton was struggling with negative headlines, the late-night saxophone solo helped humanize him and connect with younger voters. It showed that he wasn't just another politician, he was relatable, relaxed, and culturally tuned in. Clinton had been playing saxophone since childhood and once considered a career in music. He attended the Arkansas Governor's School for Gifted Musicians and even won first chair in his state's band. Though politics eventually took precedence, music remained a key part of his identity and a secret weapon on the campaign trail. But there was more to Clinton's presidency than pop culture savvy. As the 42nd president, 1993 to 2001, he presided over one of the longest economic expansions in U.S. history, balancing the federal budget and achieving a rare budget surplus. He signed significant legislation on welfare reform, crime, and education, and helped guide America into the digital age. However, his presidency was also marked by intense personal scandal. His affair with White House intern Monica Lewinsky led to his impeachment by the House of Representatives in 1998 on charges of perjury and obstruction of justice. He was acquitted by the Senate and completed his term with high approval ratings. Clinton's ability to bounce back from controversy, much like his spontaneous sax solo, reflected a presidency steeped in performance, resilience, and charisma. Whether making policy or playing the blues, Bill Clinton knew how to read a room and how to win it over. Before he became the 43rd President of the United States, George W. Bush was rallying crowds in a very different way. As the head cheerleader at Phillips Academy, the prestigious prep school in Andover, Massachusetts, in the 1960s, Bush was not just on the cheerleading squad, he led it. Photos from his school days show him in uniform, megaphone in hand, energizing fans from the sidelines of football games. It was an early hint of the pep, confidence, and showmanship that would later define his political persona. Andover was an elite institution where Bush's family name preceded him, but he was known more for his affable personality and school spirit than academic rigor. As head cheerleader, he helped choreograph routines, organize rallies, and fire up the crowd. The same skill set he'd later use to galvanize voters and connect with everyday Americans during campaign stops. Bush went on to Yale, where he also cheered, then Harvard Business School, and later served as Texas governor before being elected president in 2000 after one of the closest and most contested elections in U.S. history. His presidency was defined by seismic events: the September 11th attacks, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, and the 2008 financial crisis. His domestic legacy also includes education reform through the No Child Left Behind Act and significant public health funding for HIV/AIDS relief abroad. Throughout his time in office, Bush's folksy charm, quick wit, and clear sense of identity made him a polarizing but personable figure, a man who brought the energy of a cheer captain to the bully pulpit of the White House. And while the megaphone was long gone, the instincts never left. Barack Obama won his first Grammy in 2006 for the audiobook version of his memoir Dreams from My Father, a deeply personal account of his upbringing, racial identity, and search for belonging. His smooth delivery and emotional depth impressed both critics and listeners. He followed it with a second Grammy in 2008 for The Audacity of Hope, his political manifesto written just before he launched his presidential campaign. He's not the only president to win a Grammy. Bill Clinton and Jimmy Carter have also won in the spoken word category, but Obama is the only one to win twice and before taking office. His literary and oratorical gifts helped catapult him from a first-term senator to a history-making president. Obama's speech-making abilities became central to his public persona. His 2004 Democratic National Convention keynote address brought him national fame overnight, and his 2008 campaign, powered by slogans like "Yes, we can" and "Hope and Change," was as much about inspiration as it was about policy. As the 44th president, 2009 to 2017, Obama broke barriers as the first African American to hold the office. He passed the landmark Affordable Care Act, ordered the operation that killed Osama bin Laden, normalized relations with Cuba, and signed sweeping economic stimulus and financial reform legislation in the wake of the 2008 recession. Yet through it all, Obama remained known for his calm demeanor, dry wit, and thoughtful use of language, qualities that resonated not just in campaign speeches, but even in audiobooks. So old Donnie Boy technically comes next, but since he's currently running this joint we call a country, let's do him last and move over to good old Joe. Joe Biden, the 46th President of the United States, is known for his long political career, his empathy, and his habit of personal storytelling. But few know that behind his famously talkative nature is a lifelong battle with a speech disorder, one he began confronting as a young boy with a severe stutter. As a child growing up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, Biden was mocked by classmates and even some teachers for his inability to speak fluently. They gave him cruel nicknames like Joe Impedimenta. But Biden didn't give up. He tackled the problem head-on by memorizing poetry, practicing speeches, and most famously reciting lines into a mirror, carefully watching the shape of his mouth and training himself to control the stutter. One of his favorite poems to practice? The New Colossus, the same poem engraved at the base of the Statue of Liberty. It became symbolic of Biden's belief in second chances and quiet strength. Though he still occasionally stumbles over words, Biden turned a speech impediment into a superpower of connection, often reaching out to young people who stutter and encouraging them not to give up, because he didn't. Biden's political career spans decades. Elected to the U.S. Senate at age 29, he went on to serve as vice president under Barack Obama and finally won the presidency in 2020, defeating incumbent Donald Trump. He took office during multiple national crises, the COVID-19 pandemic, an economic downturn, and intense political division. As president, Biden is focused on infrastructure, climate policy, vaccine distribution, and international diplomacy, while also navigating deep partisan divides. His style is markedly different from his predecessors, more soft-spoken and consensus-driven, but grounded in a lifelong belief in perseverance. Biden's journey from a bullied kid with a stutter to the voice of the nation is a reminder that sometimes the most powerful voices are those that had to fight the hardest to be heard.
Long before he became the 45th and now 47th President of the United States, Donald Trump was a household name, thanks not to politics, but to television, real estate, and relentless self-promotion. In 2007, his role as host of The Apprentice earned him a coveted spot on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, making him the only U.S. president to receive that honor. The star, located at 6801 Hollywood Boulevard, commemorates Trump's work as a reality TV personality. The Apprentice, launched in 2004, featured Trump as a boardroom boss, judging aspiring entrepreneurs. With his signature catchphrase, "You're fired," Trump turned himself into a pop culture icon and a symbol of business authority. Carefully cultivated, theatrically performed, a B-grade game show host getting a star, a totally earned reward. That fame helped him leap from entertainment to politics, running a celebrity-driven outsider campaign in 2016 that defied party elites and upended political norms. He won the presidency by defeating Hillary Clinton in a surprise electoral college victory, becoming the first president with no prior military or political experience. As president in his first term, Trump oversaw sweeping tax cuts, appointed 3 Supreme Court justices, pushed through significant deregulation, and took a confrontational stance on immigration, trade, and global alliances. His presidency was marked by intense polarization, impeachment twice, and a dominant presence on social media, particularly Twitter. X. Like X? Seriously? What a fucking stupid name. It never will feel right. Anyway, whatever it's called, Donald utilized it. Often announced policy and attacked opponents in real time. After losing the 2020 election to Joe Biden, Trump acted like a big-ass baby who just shit his pants and challenged the results, culminating in the January 6th Capitol insurrection, which led to his second impeachment. He left office with historic controversy and an unbroken political base. In 2024, Trump ran again and won, returning to the presidency as the first person since Grover Cleveland to serve non-consecutive terms, now as both the 45th and 47th president. And his Hollywood star? It has been vandalized, smashed, rebuilt, and guarded, perhaps the most literal symbol of a legacy that continues to divide, dazzle, and dominate public attention. Also, the man is a convicted felon, like he's literally a criminal.
And there you go. That's it. That's all of them. The last 15 individuals to make up our list of interesting facts on the 47 presidents. What do you think? Are these guys pretty interesting? Are they boring? Is Jimmy Carter not dead, but perhaps with just the aliens now? Sound off in the comments below. Be sure to like this video, because I assure you, it's the best piece of content you've ever seen in your life. Subscribe to the channel. Take this link and spam it across the globe, man. Just like go door to door. Tell your friends. You know, just do it. Okay, see you next week.